Hello and welcome to the Disruption Code, this episode of the Event Manager podcast with Shawn Kanungo. I'm Miguel Neves, the editor-in-chief of EventMB, and on this episode, I'm joined by none other than disruptive innovation keynote speaker Shawn Kanungo, and we talk about disruptive innovation and his story and how he got to be a speaker on disruptive innovation. We talk a lot about hybrid events and how they are still so new, and we are developing different ways of using hybrid events. We talk about Shawn's amazing studio production and the team that he works with to make all his video and all his virtual events look as good as they can. We talk about the importance of looking good in virtual events or at any event and how that really helps to carry the message. We talk about the next season of events and how they are going to be hybrid and in person and a mix of different events. And of course, we talk about Shawn's favorite topic, NFTs, and how we can apply NFTs to events. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you subscribe and leave a review of this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you very much for listening.
Now for a word from our sponsors, PHL Life Sciences, a division of the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau. Host your convention or trade show in Philadelphia, one of America's leading life sciences hubs. PHL Life Sciences, the first and only CVB division of its kind, will connect you to the professionals at the forefront of your industry and to a culture you can only find in Philadelphia. A city known for its rich history that's forging a bright future, Philadelphia challenges the expected and defies convention. A world of discovery is waiting. Visit phllife.com to learn more.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Miguel Neves, editor-in-chief of EventMB, and I'm joined by none other than Shawn Kanungo. Shawn, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This is an honor and a pleasure. And, you know, if you've gone this far on the podcast, I just recommend that you give him a rating, a review, subscribe on Spotify or Apple or wherever you are, because I think what you're doing is pulling together some really great event strategists and thought leaders in this space, thinking about the future. And so I've been enjoying diving into all of them, and you're doing such a great job. So there you go.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being a listener and for recommending to your audience. I think it's always great. So, we've met, I don't know, maybe a couple of years ago, maybe online, but tell me a little bit about who is Shawn Kanungo? Give us an introduction in your own words of who you are and what you're all about.
Yeah. So, people call me a disruption strategist or innovation strategist. That's what I'm really passionate about I spent 12 years at Deloitte, really on the strategy innovation side, helping organizations with figuring out how can they navigate disruption. Left them in 2018, and on my own, advising corporate executives and organizations on disruption. Being part of a number of different ventures, which we're trying to scale up in the innovation technology space. And to me, I live and breathe technology, innovation, thinking about what's next, thinking about the future. I obviously speak on this topic a lot as well. And, that's a little bit about me. I think at the end of the day, when people, if people don't know me, I'm describing myself, but I think for most people that are on the internet, or they see me online, or they've heard about me, they know me as the disruption guy. I've taken that word, and I'll just take it to when I die, I guess, Miguel.
Well, it's important to have a kind of branding that you kind of stick to, right? I think it's, I always say that when I meet someone, it's important to give them one thing that they can kind of remember me by. I'm not going to be able to tell them my life story. They're not going to remember all the details. So usually I stick to something around like, I'm Portuguese. And I used to do a lot of work on social media. So I'm the social media guy from Portugal. And I feel like if they can remember those things, then at least anytime they think of Portugal or social media, they'll think of me. And I think, if you as the disruption guy, that makes a lot of sense. When they think about disruption or kind of innovation, then they may think of you, which I think is in terms of branding.
When it comes to speaking as well, like people, when people ask me, can you speak on diversity, inclusion? Can you speak on leadership or sales? Or I'm like, I don't know anything about those things. I only know this one topic, which is around disruptive innovation. And I agree with you. I think niching down and being known for something is really important. I do think that there is room to evolve and grow and be involved in other things, but it does help to be known for one particular thing.
For sure. Now, tell me a little bit about your kind of how would you define disruptive innovation? I think that's, obviously something you talk a lot about, but I'd be really interested to understand, is there a process? Is there a way to kind of incite disruptive innovation? Or is it because I kind of see people talk about this, and it's easy to shout out the Uber examples and the Airbnb examples and go like, look, these companies did disruptive innovation. Like, I get it, but is there a way to maybe not guarantee, but to start us off, for a company that wants to invest in being disruptive? Like, where do they start? Like, what kind of conversation should they be having?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. It's very difficult to be a disruptor. It's probably one of the most difficult things to do. Most people try to be a disruptor, but it requires you to be courageous and to step outside of your comfort zone and challenge the status quo. To me, to define disruption very clearly, it's somebody that comes into a space and fundamentally changes the status quo. It's somebody that is doing something so radical that it changes the trajectory of not only that organization, but potentially the entire industry. I think that is what disruption means. I think what people get wrong when it comes to, innovation or disruption, because people throw those words around like all the time. I think innovation can be not only just technology, it could be about product or processes or your channels, your workforce, your talent, your customer experience. It can be all these different things, but it can also be very incremental. And at the same time, it can be very disruptive. And so I think for organizations that are trying to be disruptors, to start, they have to be innovators, right? They have to develop a culture of innovation, allowing their people to try new ways of doing things, to experiment with new ways of doing things. And then ultimately, by finding experiments that work, then you can actually start challenging the status quo, bringing those experiments inside of your organization that reject sort of the immune system, and those things become sort of your new core. I think that is the way sort of being a start to be disruptive. It's very difficult to do, but I think it's what every organization should strive to do is ultimately continuously try to disrupt themselves.
Interesting. And you talked a little bit about the disruptive culture. Is that a leadership thing? Is that something that has to come from the top in terms of, we are now a disruptive company and we have to do disruptive things? What does that mean?
I believe that I wouldn't describe it as a disruptive culture, but ultimately a culture of innovation. And I think it does have to come from the top, where you have to empower people from the bottom. Like, you have to empower everyone to go off and innovate, try new ways of doing things. Like, to me, innovation is permissionless. The biggest mistake people do when it comes to innovation is they get into innovation theater, right? They hire a chief innovation officer, a chief digital officer. They have, these brainstorming whiteboard sessions. They they have an accelerator, they have an incubator, they are, playing in this innovative theater, when in reality, the way of actually letting your innovation sort of fuel the organization or allowing it to be free is just empowering people to try new ways of doing things. And I think that's actually very, it sounds really good in practice, but to actually put it into execution is very difficult, because that means changing your performance management. It's actually changing your compensation. It's changing how you organize your talent. Like, imagine compensating people for taking shots and taking failures, saying you're going to get compensated for failing 9 times out of 10. No one does that. So it's to truly build a culture of innovation requires leadership to take a step back and allow their people to try.
And also, I mean, I've heard this a few times, but I think that idea that you don't punish failures, right? As long as there's an idea, as long as something was tested, as long as something was tried for good reasons, and then failure is something that hopefully the organization can absorb and learn from, right? And kind of use that as fuel for future things.
And I think you just hit on it, the key piece at the end there, which was learn from something. I think ultimately, if you try an experiment and you don't learn from anything, then that's a bad idea. That's a bad experiment. And yes, somebody should be reprimanded for taking that experiment with no learnings whatsoever. So I think we can't just experiment for the sake of experimenting. We need to learn and build on top of it. And if we're not, it's not a good experiment.
Great. That's really interesting. So let's jump to the event that you did a few days ago. I was in the audience, checked it out, the Digital Disruptor. You were one of the keynote speakers, one of 2, I think. You were sort of towards the end of the event. It was a bit different. It was hybrid. It really kind of sold itself as being a really big, a really different type of event. What was your view as a speaker, and what did you kind of like about it, and what did you think? What did you learn from it?
Well, to be honest with you, we learned a ton, and I want to give a shout out to Heidi and the entire crew at the Digital Disruptor, because they really put on an ambitious event, and the production level was high. In Stavanger, Norway, multiple cameras with their particular audience, and obviously getting some really great speakers like Duncan. For us on my side, on our production side, I think it was we had a lot of fun doing it. At the end of the day, to me, the goal is for at least a couple people in the audience to start the next day and changing their behaviors, trying something that they've never tried before, or doing something different. Or, I talked about a couple different pieces, whether it's around innovation or blockchain, and, just people sort of diving into it. To me, that is the barometer for success. But I think when it comes to hybrid, I mean, that was probably the second hybrid where I was the person on screen while, you had people virtually and then people in the audience. Normally when we've done a hybrid, I've been with an audience in front of me. So imagine doing something for the second time in your life. And for the first time, actually engaging with an audience on the ground floor, which was really cool. And I thought that was executed really well. I think it was the first time that an event organizer tried something incredibly ambitious. And it was admirable. Were we totally happy what we did on our side? No, I think we learned a million different things. And it's because it was only the second time we did it. We've done hundreds of different virtual events, and we're kind of starting to learn what makes a really great virtual event. I mean, we haven't really even started in hybrid, and it's so difficult to engage people in person, online. And I said this at the end, during the Q&A. They asked me about the hybrid, and I said, I've never had a threesome, but being able to please both parties on site and virtually is extremely difficult to do. And I'm not sure if we accomplish that. I know with, Duncan, who's a phenomenal speaker as well, like he did a great job engaging the in-person audience, but perhaps he could have done a better job, engaging the virtual audience, and just going back and forth. And I just thought that it was an incredibly ambitious effort, and I think we got a lot of learnings out of it. And I hope a couple people, learned some pieces out of it and were able to go off and change their perspective on a couple things. What did you think? You were there as well. Like, I'd love to get your thoughts.
I agree. I think Heidi has to be congratulated. I think it's challenging. I think especially being a keynote speaker remotely to a hybrid audience. I think it probably would have been slightly different if you had an audience where you were.
Absolutely.
So if you were speaking from a sort of hub, then you have the people's energy to feed from, right? And you have people in front of you and you have that action. And that has a certain energy around it. When you're doing it remotely, like you said, we're just learning how to do this. If you were doing it to a virtual audience, you've kind of figured that out, right? You when you're focusing on the virtual audience, maybe it's the chat, maybe it's the Q&A, whatever it is that you're kind of pulling out of the virtual audience, that makes a lot of sense. When the audience is there in person, I think it's tough. And I think it's a tough ask for a live audience, for an in-person audience, to then watch a keynote on a screen.
Oh, how many people want to watch, a keynote while you're in person and you're watching a video? It's very difficult to pull off. Unless it's a movie that's like, billions of dollars of production. Even at that point, you may want to still go on your phone. It is a very difficult ask from the audience perspective. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah. No, I just think so I've been part of a number of events that have done some sort of hybrid setup. And with hybrid, there are so many different combinations, right? But let's say I was doing a Zoom-based event recently, and one of the speakers wanted to kind of show off a little bit more of a hybrid setup. So it actually turned out being 3 speakers sitting at a table in kind of an office. And when everybody else is virtual, everybody else is remote, large on the screen, and then 3 people are sitting in a room together, it's just instantly a different dynamic. And then the kind of the audio issues and the visual issues, like they can't see us as well, and we can't see them as well, and they can't hear us as well. So it's sort of like, I'm not saying virtual is perfect by any means, but when everybody's virtual, you know where to stand. You know how to make that screen in front of that person come alive. You know what you have to do. When some people are virtual and some people are in person, then it's really hard to have that balance. And I think you guys did a great job, both you and Duncan, but it's a really hard task. And like you say, I think getting people that are in person in the room to see a speaker remotely is a hard ask, is a really hard thing to ask people to do.
I was recently in Vegas for an event, and it was a hybrid event as well. And there was like hundreds of people in this in one of the auditoriums, and they were watching somebody on screen, like basically in their house, with a headset on, no engagement, and I was just baffled. I'm like, I'll text you the video after. I was baffled because I'm like, how is this where we got to in terms of a hybrid event that we're just watching somebody on screen? It can't be it. It can't be it. And I think what the Digital Disruptor did really well is that they did have an in-person moderator there. And she was unbelievable, trying to create a little bit of energy with the audience that I couldn't provide because I wasn't physically there. While people, were on site. And I think she did a great job at trying to at least pull some people together at the very least. It's such a hard ask. And I think it asks the question, Miguel, like, can we do hybrid? Is it possible? Are we just, because I see a lot of people talking about hybrid and how to do a great hybrid event. And I'm thinking to myself, is it too difficult to pull off? Because if I'm at a party, and I think about events as like a magical space, where you're colliding with other people, you see people you haven't seen before. There's something about going somewhere and being part of an in-person event that you can't replace. And I'm thinking to myself, is it even remotely possible to create an unbelievable hybrid experience for both the virtual attendees and the in-person ideas? Is it possible? I guess more so for the virtual, because I think if you're in person and you call it a hybrid, but still everything is just in person, then you'll say it's great. But I'm saying both of them together. Is it even possible?
The event is hybrid, but nobody's having a hybrid experience. You're either having a remote online experience or you're at the event. So I think it's a good question. Yeah, and I was kind of thinking, first of all, with the digital disruptor, Norwegians are not known to be super participative at events, right? I mean, they're not. I think the Finns have even a worse reputation when it comes to that. But it's not an audience that's like ready to jump on stage and ask questions. Yeah. So that's a tough ask even for a live event. But I was thinking of, for the virtual audience, I think both you and Duncan did a good job, but I think if you were able to just focus on the virtual audience would have, had a lot more attention, would have felt a lot more engaged, right? Because you're trying to kind of engage these two very different audiences and the challenge is this live audience. So you're kind of focusing a lot of energy on them. And I think if I was remote and you were remote and there was no live audience, I would feel much more like you were taking care of me more than taking care of the people that were in Norway, right?
I think it's impossible to figure out how much attention you should place on each audience. And I think this is the first mistake that we made. This was the biggest insight that I had when we ran our first hybrid event, when I had an in-person audience with me. And I think that we dropped the ball on this too, is I was focusing way too much attention again into the in-person audience. We had maybe 50 people in person and we have 300 people virtually. And I was spending probably 70% of my time with people in person, which kind of, as a human, it kind of makes sense. These people showed up. So maybe I should, you put my attention on them. But I should have remembered, by the way, there's actually 300 people online and my attention should have been more on them. How do you figure out what the balance is? That's why I'm saying it's so difficult to please both audiences. And it's, I don't know, like I can't wait for us to get past this sort of first inning where we're like, oh, we approached it in this sort of way. It's completely wrong. I know there's an angle of approaching hybrid that I haven't really figured out yet, or we haven't figured out yet, that is going to unlock what hybrid truly, truly means. But at this point, we need people like the digital disruptor to continuously push, the narrative and try these experiments so that we can learn from them. And I thought it was an unbelievably ambitious effort, and I applaud them.
No, I think it's very true. Somebody I've done a lot of work with, Garrett Heikup. He runs a company called Live Online Events. And they've actually been doing hybrid events for a long time, mainly in the sort of association world. And again, what we mean by hybrid changes, depending on the event, but they've essentially been doing live streams from mainly association events for a long time. And a lot of these end up being live stream of the speaker on stage. And then when there's sort of dead time in the audience, the virtual audience gets interviews, gets sort of exclusive content. So it's more about sort of contextualizing, and his role is normally the one of a moderator, not necessarily a speaker. And he always advises that there should be two moderators. There should be a moderator for the live audience, a moderator for the online audience. At some points, you should sort of connect those two to make sure that everybody can hear everything, but it's not necessarily that easy to do that. So I think also the format of events helps a lot. I think a sort of interview style format, a conversational format, I think works pretty well for both types of audiences. I think the keynote delivery kind of high energy is a bit more challenging, because then you're dividing your energy in a way. I don't know about you, but whenever I've done keynotes, it's so important to feel that energy from the room and to sort of have as part of the keynote some sort of interaction, raise your hand, let me know if you agree, whatever.
Totally.
And if you're getting those signals in very different formats, it's so hard to really understand like what's resonating with which audience. So I think the formatting may be part of the solution, or at least acknowledging what works well in one format and what doesn't work so well, and sort of navigating it in that sense.
Yeah, it's interesting that, it's all energy based, right? So when you're doing it, first of all, when you're doing something virtually, you don't feel any energy. So you're just kind of running blind, similar to hybrid. But when you're doing a hybrid and there's an in-person audience in front of you, I mean, I think part of the reason why you tend to focus a little bit more on the in-person audience is that's who's giving you energy. So you naturally try to gravitate yourself to the in-person audience. And yeah, it's a very difficult thing to manage. And I think we learned a million things from this. And I was kind of nervous with Dunkin's because I know the thing froze a couple times, and I was like, okay, and I felt for Dunkin' because sometimes, as a presenter, you have a narrative that you want to share and continue on, and when something's broken, in between, and I think that happened to us too. You kind of lose, it's like watching a movie and you lose like part of it. You're kind of like, should I keep watching this? So I know for me that's a big part too. So
lots of learnings.
Yeah.
I like how you put it, that you need to get the reps in, right? You need to kind of keep practicing until you figure it all out.
Yeah. How many people have done, 100 truly hybrid events where you're engaging both audiences at the same time? I don't think there's anybody in the world that has done this yet. Yeah, there's people that have been running hybrid a long time before the pandemic, but not really sort of engaging people, this in both ways. I have never seen it happen. And I think we're just in a new land, new world.
Check out Garrett. I think you'll find some interesting stuff there, but his stuff is, because it's very much for associations, it's not something that's in the public eye normally, but I would definitely suggest checking him out. I think they've done a lot of work and figured at least some of this stuff out.
Are you ready to celebrate your successes in the world of meetings and events? The Skift Meetings Awards are back for 2024, recognizing the most innovative business events companies across 15 categories, and we want you to be a part of it. Winners will feature on Skift Meetings, sending a clear signal to events professionals around the world that these are partners they can rely on. The final deadline for submissions is June 11th. We encourage you to start your submission today to secure the best entry rates. For more information and to start your submission, head to live.skift.com.
So Shawn, I think, as the disruption speaker, one of the things that I noticed that you've done, which is really interesting from my perspective, is that you went out and you hired, I don't know exactly the deal, but you essentially, every time I've seen you speak and every video that I've seen you do is from a specific theater. And I know you've set up quite a high production level crew there with sound, cameras, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And for me, that's quite a unique approach, because I used to be more of a speaker, and I do quite a bit of speaking as well. And I've seen a lot of speakers invest heavily in creating their home studios, which is, have a spare room and buy a nice microphone and figure out how to use Ecamm or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You didn't take that approach. You went for, a very different approach. Could you tell me a little bit about the thinking behind that and how that worked out?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a psychopath. I don't know. At the beginning of this pandemic, when it hit, and things sort of pivoted to virtual, I thought it was going to be a home game for us and my team, because we've been doing so much video stuff over the years. And I literally called the filmmakers that I normally work with, and I specifically say that they're filmmakers. They're not event people. They're not like, they don't run events. They are filmmakers. They do documentaries, and that's what they do. I said, have you guys ever done a live stream before? They said they've never done one before. So, well, let's try to figure out how can we create the best virtual experience that people have seen. And I think, of course, the content is obviously the most important piece, but for me, I think theatrics is a big piece of what I do. Like I love making the presentations big and bold and unique and differentiated. I mean, I think it goes back to my topic around innovation. If you watch an innovation speaker and they're looking like they're in a hostage video, I mean, it's not going to signal, you're not going to get that much confidence out of it. We were also lucky. We've shot some stuff in a theater before, and I think part of the reason why we love the theater vibe is because the lighting's already there. I mean, part of it is the economics. The lighting's already there. They've already spent hundreds and thousands of dollars of lighting in there. There's a stage already. It's built for performance. I mean, throughout history, theaters have been the epicenter for performance. So to us, it always made sense that a theater might be a great way to do an event, whether it's in person or hybrid. And so there was a theater that we knew and we shot in, and we asked them, "Hey guys, like, has anybody ever done this?" They're like, "No." So we went in there and we tested the place out, lighting and whatnot. And, through hundreds of different events, we've kind of sort of figured out how to run an event there. And we just thought that would be an optimal place to run a event. And since then, we've been able to work in other theaters. And the theater that you saw us in, Digital Disruptor, I mean, that's probably the 5th time that we've been in there, because the theater that we were previously at, they're renovating. So and by the way, we've opened up to other theaters across, our city that we have a pick of, 5-6 theaters that we can go to, because everyone now has a strong internet connection. And I think the most important thing is, in my presentations, I talk about this idea of costly signaling. It's this idea that by putting in perceived effort, it can actually result in greater value and meaning to the end client or end customer or the end viewer. Meaning, if it looks like you put a lot of effort into something, the message is going to translate a little bit more. It goes back to the irrational side of human beings. If it looks like I put a lot of effort customizing a presentation for you, you're naturally going to be a little bit more in tune, you're going to pay attention a little bit more, because why would somebody do all of this just for this hour presentation on Zoom while you're eating lunch? It makes zero sense. But that's what costly signaling is all about. It's like, how can you make things more magical and meaningful and memorable? And to me, putting an extraordinary amount of effort actually translates into a better message. I mean, I could be delivering the same message that I am in my house, but for some reason, the fact that I'm in a theater, the fact that I'm with a production crew, it's going to land a little bit deeper. It makes no sense.
Yeah, no, I think it all adds up nicely. But what I also thought was interesting is, you kept your crew, rather than sort of going home studio and doing everything yourself and figuring out how to, press a few buttons and change the slides behind you, which I think most speakers have done. You kept the crew, you kept people involved. You kept, hiring theaters out. Not that you necessarily hired theaters out before, but you kept the sort of ecosystem around you going. I don't know how intentional that was, but I have this fear that speakers are now going to go back to kind of speaking live and then going to want to do everything themselves because they're so used to this virtual environment where they had to figure out all this stuff. And I think it's interesting to kind of keep that team going. It's not just you sitting in your home. I don't know if that was ever something that crossed your mind.
I think for me, it's always been about how do you create the best experience possible? And I can't do that myself. I mean, I hate cameras and gadgets. And even though I'm the innovation guy, I don't want to deal with all the stuff that's involved in the audio and the video. And I don't want to deal with all of it. And I think having really great people around you will just make the product better. I mean, of course, there is a cost element to all of this, right? And of course, there's a cost to people helping you. Of course, there's a cost to, renting out a theater. But can you imagine the cost of having hundreds of people in an hour session? I mean, that's thousands of hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars of people wasting their time on you. So for any speaker that has that opportunity to engage people for an hour, I mean, take it seriously. How much money is being wasted watching you? So you better put the time in. That's what I think. And so, yeah, I'm gonna continuously invest in having world-class people around me so that I look good. I think that's just important, and just showing up with high quality production. If you go on YouTube and you put my name in, Shawn Kanungo, into YouTube, you won't find a single video that's shot on an iPhone or that's not well produced, because I want to also project the fact that, listen, when you hire me for anything or you interact with me, that it's going to be high quality. I showed up today with a podcast mic because I want this thing to sound crispy. Showing up with and showing your audience that you care is really important to me.
I think that's a great message, and I think a lot of event people will agree with that. And I think it's easy to forget now that we've been to this kind of virtual only environment, and everybody's figured out ways to kind of save money and make events cheaper. It's like, there's a reason events are expensive. And I think if you want to invest in people, if you want to invest in delivering a strong message, there's a cost to that, but there's also a return on that investment, right? I'm sure your message would be awesome if you were doing it from your spare bedroom in your house, but the message that you send out as a disruptor from a theater with high production value is a stronger message, right? It delivers, it's more impactful.
Yeah, it's incrementally. Yeah, I don't know how much I haven't done the percentages, but I think it does at least change it a little bit. And by the way, it actually produces really better post-production, right? So when we do something and now we're taking a clip and we're putting it out in the world, it actually looks nicer. Do you want to watch something afterwards that's, slightly, clipped better and looks high quality? I think so. And so that was the other piece that I was thinking about was, how do you make it look good? That's why even in person, when I go to an in-person event, I still have a film crew with me. This is pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. I still have a film crew with me because I want to make sure that I have a really high quality shot of this content. So when afterwards, it looks high quality again afterwards. And I think that's a piece that we haven't really figured out in terms of events. But I want to ask you, why do you think, whether it's speakers or sort of event designers, why is it that we don't put the love into, making things feel good and look good at the end of the day? Like, we should put our ultimate effort into it, but why don't we do that? Why do you think?
Good question. I mean, the amount of CEOs that I see, running important virtual events with a laptop on their lap with terrible sound and terrible lighting and not really caring. And I've been on the production side of that and sort of asking people to turn and put lighting on and do stuff. And a lot of people just won't do it. They'll say like, yeah, I'll work that out later. And then they show up for the event and it sounds terrible. And I don't know. I think maybe part of it is that they see the virtual medium as inferior. They would dress up and put a nice suit on and show up if they were doing a live event, but when they do it virtually, they don't feel it as impactful. And I think another part of it is we haven't done this long enough to demand it of them. Yeah, I think if this, I don't know, maybe this will be on BuzzFeed or whatever. If there's people saying, hey, CEO of whatever company, you got to look good on camera if I'm going to watch you, or else I'm going to not pay attention. I think that kind of message, we know that as event people, but I think maybe that message hasn't gone through yet. And yeah, I think it's just unfortunate. We are definitely seeing kind of lower numbers, lower attendance when it comes to virtual events. And I think that's part of the issue. It's not necessarily that virtual events are worse. They're different, as you say, but when people don't make an effort, how do you expect the audience to make an effort?
Oh my God, that's it. I think you just hit it right on the head. That was the line. Yeah, I totally agree. And I the unfortunate piece, like I would love for every CEO, every speaker that shows up to a virtual event to show up with effort, because it's going to raise the value of virtual events as a whole. And unfortunately, what has happened over the last 18, 19 months is that people are zoomed out, right? They have Zoom fatigue because they've seen way too many crappy events. They've been part of way too many Zoom meetings that are, not that
Should have been an
great.
email.
And, yeah. And that's really unfortunate. So yeah, we're going to continuously try to elevate. We're always trying to elevate the experience virtually. And then even with hybrid, I'm excited. Like, to me, it's like, it's new land. So I can't wait to continuously experimenting and figuring out what this is all about. And I think that goes to my sort of DNA. When everything is new, I just get excited and I want to try.
It's disruptive innovation. It's a good thing to disrupt at this point. I mean, I have this thing that I say that when it comes to a virtual event, when people are watching online, the event is the guest in somebody's house, not the other way around. When you go to a live event, you're the guest. You walk in, there's a red carpet, you go and sit down in the audience, you're the guest at the event. But in virtual, the event is the guest in your house. So you got to show up nicely dressed. You got to show up looking good as the virtual event and be a good guest. And then people will pay attention, because if you're not a good guest, they'll switch you off, right? They'll disconnect, whether it's mentally or physically.
I see. That's great. I think that's, showing up, with a nice bottle of champagne so that people are like, oh, she or he really cares, I think is, I think that's a really great analogy. I think also I think we forget the fact that I have no idea what people are doing on the other side of a virtual event. Forget hybrid. Let's just talk about virtual. I have no idea what people are doing on the other side. They could be going on Twitter or TikTok, and I think they probably are. I mean, I would argue that even if you had, Donald Trump giving Barack Obama a massage, you would still be on Twitter. Like, I just think that there is, I see it with my wife, or even myself. Sometimes I'm watching like an Avengers movie where they put hundreds of millions of dollars into the production, and I'm looking on the internet for something. Like, I think when the only thing that prevents us from not going on our phone when we're in an in-person event is because it looks bad to our neighbor that we're on our phone. And so I just
that's why everybody sits in the back row so that nobody will actually see the right. I do this thing sometimes at in-person events when I can go to them, and I kind of stand behind the last row and I look at how many people are on their phones. And every time I've done this exercise, I usually see more than 50% of the audience on their phones. We like to think about the in-person events as being super engaging and everybody's watching everything, but it's just not true. A lot of us are checked out, and hopefully they're on their phones because they're tweeting about the event. But I think that most are checking their emails and kind of getting sucked into the day-to-day that they're not able to do while they're, in sessions. And I think it's just natural.
I think we should take a page from the comedy shows where they use Yonder and they put people's phones in, and so that you're totally immersed and engaged into the actual content. I've never been to a business conference yet where they've done that, but I think we should invest in that. And I think the comedians that do that, they've all said that they get a better engaged audience when the phones are off. And it's funny, when you go to a show with Yonder, you'll see people like randomly, like just touching they'll like look for their phone, even though they know it's not there. It's just like an instinct that we have. Like, where is it? Is it in my pocket? Like, it's wild. That's how addicted we are.
It's the ghost vibration, right? When you think your leg's vibrating and your phone's not there. So what are your plans for the fall season? We wanted to talk a little bit about kind of what's happening with events. I guess hybrid is a big thing. Do you have a lot of hybrid events kind of lined up, or what are you seeing for the fall season?
At this point, September is still all virtual. October, every week I am going somewhere. It's like a mix of in-person and virtual. I think most organizers are afraid of hybrid, and I think are trying to, avoid it. or if they are, they're just kind of just only live streaming. They're not doing something as ambitious as what the digital disruptor are doing. But I think, it's a combination between virtual and in person. Obviously, I'd say 70% more virtual and 30% in person. And I think we'll see. I mean, I thought we would be done by now, so I'm not making any predictions about, where this pandemic is going to go. But I think you're going to see a lot more people try hybrid and investigate a little bit more of what that's going to look like in probably 2022. I think for most people, it's way too ambitious, and it's a lot of money, right? Being able to produce something that's high quality, a hybrid event that's high quality is very expensive to do, and I think most are afraid to do it right now.
Yeah, that's pretty much what we're seeing as well. Want to make sure we have time to cover what I think is one of your favorite topics, which is NFTs. And I remember us talking about the last event. We mentioned it briefly, but I'm particularly, NFTs are a complex and also a bit controversial subject. I think a lot of people are seeing an opportunity to invest and get involved, and a lot of other people are just confused and not really sure what's happening. But I'm particularly interested in your views on NFTs for events, or how do they connect with kind of the event industry? And I know you had some sort of ideas around that. Maybe we could touch on that briefly.
I honestly believe NFTs are a great way of engaging an audience pre-event, post-event, during event. I think I had this great, and you can go on YouTube, I have an hour-long talk with An Nguyen about NFTs and events. And that was early in the game that we were exploring what the possibilities are. By the way, for those in the audience, NFT is a non-fungible token. It's essentially a digital collectible that you can get on, that's authenticated through the blockchain. And I think the greatest example, I did that video with Anne, and then a couple months later, Gary Vaynerchuk came out with a NFT project that's tied to events. And I think we have to give him a lot of credit, because I think he has paved the way for what an NFT in events actually means. What he did was he minted a number of different, characters that people could own and invest. And those tickets those collectibles are not only an asset that people can own and trade and whatnot, but they unlock tickets to an event for the next 3 years. And they also have other features, like you can get a FaceTime, or you can get, a copy of his book or whatever. Each of those characters or collectibles that people own have different attributes that you can get from Gary. And I think the interesting part is that it actually gives you the ticket to a potential event. And what he's done is not only he's changed the entire business model of events, he's changed the engagement of events. And I don't think anybody in the event industry is paying attention. And you got to give the guy credit, because he was the first one to truly create an NFT project that's related to events that was a big hit. I mean, this thing is worth, $41 million right now. And people are trading. It's still a very highly touted NFT project. And I think it goes back to what events are. Events are supposed to be the epicenter for community. And NFTs are a great way of getting your audience to be an owner of the community, feeling like they own something as part of your community, whether you are, the dairy farmers of Netherlands, or you are, the orthodontist of New Jersey. Like, you can feel like you're part of the community by maybe even owning something. And there's lots of ideas on how NFTs can impact events, from ticketing to owning a moment within a particular conference, to minting different dynamic NFTs where something happens during an event and now you can own a piece of it. I think there's lots of elements that we should be exploring. And I think Gary Vee has paved an amazing trail for us.
So you have a production team following you around all events. You create all these videos. when are those going to become NFTs?
Well, I did mint. I have minted a couple of NFTs. I think what Gary has, what I don't have, and I think what many organizations have and brands have, what they don't have, is they have attention, but they don't have community. And I think we should be when people talk about community, they throw it out so loosely, like community. I think when people talk about community, they're really actually just talking about attention. I think community is ultimately not about the brand or the organization, but it's about the people and the individuals as part of the community that are able to evangelize the product or the brand on their own, that they're having conversations on their own. And I think for most brands, they don't have that. They just have attention. I'm not so naive to know that I don't have a community. I have attention. I don't have community. Gary V is at a level where he does have a community. You can see it in his Discord that people are talking about him, but also they're talking to each other as well. I would argue that you have great companies like Nike that are amazing and they can garner a lot of attention. Potentially they might have pockets of community, but so I think events actually do have community. I think you have like-minded people from different industries that are coming together that are they do have community. And I think that is an unbelievable trait to have because most companies and brands don't have that. And so how can we actually utilize this community for good and change the business model and change get into this NFT space? I think it's really, really exciting. So I would love to get to a point where I start developing a community, and that's going to take time and investment. And I can't wait to get to there.
That sounds really interesting. Make sure I'm sure we'll see news of your NFTs as soon as they're minted or the community.
I am working on something, but I'm not ready to release that yet. But I don't want to do something that's kind of right now we're in NFT. I would say NFT, fantasy land where there's a lot of people buying, apes and rocks for millions of dollars. To me, I think I'm excited about giving really great utility for an NFT. I think Gary has done that. I think others have done that. And I want to do something like that, where it's not just something that you can own in your pocket, but it actually gives true utility.
That sounds like a good way of looking at NFTs. And yeah, I've been following the Gary V, the V Friends NFT experience quite a bit. And I think there's parts of it that are really interesting. I think there's parts of it that are sort of like a voucher almost. Like if you buy the gold package, you get to speak to Gary or, in that kind of terms. And so, but I think there's elements of the NFT that are unique to NFTs, particularly if you're selling the NFT or if you're trading that kind of like secondary market. I think that's quite interesting because you don't necessarily, I guess you could trade a voucher or a sponsorship of Gary V, but it would be a bit tricky. And with NFTs, it's sort of built into the way they work as far as I understand. So that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think for many events, I'd say sporting events, if there's a secondary market, the team or the organizers don't get the cut from that royalty, right? Mm-hmm. It's just traded on a secondary market. They don't get a piece of that. And I think with NFTs, it's already built into the code that you do get a piece of the resale. And I think that's super disruptive. And I think that changes the business model. So
it does also push people to be early investors, right? Because if you're the first investor, then you get to have that derivative kind of revenue from the selling of the NFT. I don't know if it works. I don't know exactly how it works, but I don't think that if you're in the secondary market, do you keep then accumulating those kind of deals, or is that only for the first purchaser?
That's only for the first, the person that, depends how the code is written, but the person that essentially is the minter, the organizer, the original founders, essentially, of the NFT. In most projects, they're the ones that are benefiting from it. And by the way, there's I've seen unique ways that people have used NFTs. So, for example, if you have an event and people share the event, then if you share the event and you share your sort of your address, your sort of Ether address, you can actually contribute. You can actually get compensated for sharing that event, which is really interesting. So you can actually have an event go viral and everyone being compensated for sharing that event. And you can only really do that through NFTs. And so it actually, what you're doing is you're trading likes and comments and shares into investment and ownership, which I think is probably where we're going with this. I think it's really exciting and disruptive.
That sounds really interesting, and definitely a lot of potential there for communities and for events. I think it makes a lot of sense. Great talking to you, Shawn. As always, thank you for being on the podcast. I would like to ask you one last question, which is really about who we should invite next to be on the podcast. We'd love to just pick your brain and find a guest that you maybe would want to suggest that would be a good guest. And we're going to go back and kind of contact all these people and hopefully have them on the second or third series of the podcast.
Well, first of all, you're doing, like I said, again, if you've gotten this far during the podcast, please subscribe, rate, review. It would really help. It's a great podcast and putting a lot of effort into it, because you are curating some awesome folks within the event industry. I think it would be great to have Gary V. I think what he's doing with V Friends is great. I think getting somebody like that's in the NFT space at the intersection of NFT events would be awesome. There's a guy named Rob Morrison. He's got a new company called NFT. It's called a Nifty Agency, which is really trying to work with brands and events in the NFT space. I think Anne would be great on the podcast as well. I mentioned her. I think, there's a lot of people. I think that's what I would say. Yeah, I'll leave it those two people.
Awesome.
Those three
Great
people:
suggestions.
Gary, Rob, and yeah.
I'm sure Gary gets about 1 million requests for being on podcasts, but hey, let's be 1,000,001, and you never know.
Well, I think
Shawn, thank you so much.
Around NFT and events, I think he might get excited about it.
That might be, that's a good topic. At least it's a little bit different and maybe a little bit, like you said, I think he's doing something a little bit unique. So it'd be good to get his view on it on the podcast. Shawn, thank you so much. Everybody listening, like Shawn said, please rate, review, and let us know what you think about the podcast. Thank you for listening, and hopefully you'll join us again on the Event Manager podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the Event Manager podcast. Please subscribe and rate the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. For the latest news and the best articles on technology and innovation in the event industry, head over to eventmb.com.